All right, we've got Andrew in Allentown. Thanks for waiting.
Hey, what's up? How's the weather down in Texas?
Hot, really hot.
Okay.
My air conditioner went out yesterday, but we got it fixed. Oof.
Oh, good. But here's my question. From my perspective of being a YouTube user, I'm a username name same as you. I'm noticing like a new fanaticism against theism these days. It seems like
fanaticism against theism?
Yeah, it seems like every time I bring up an argument, there's always straw man arguments against it. I know there's like a principle.
So can you give like an example of one of your arguments in the straw man against it?
Well, I mean, there's loads of them. Like, I would say God is a mind, and then it's like, well, mind is a thinking. They would go back and resort to a brain, and how a mind can't exist without a brain. And so
how is that a straw man?
Yeah, I don't understand how that's
a straw man is when you erect something that is false. Where are the examples of minds that exist apart from physical brains? Where are they?
There's been scientific studies. I mean, this is throwing off my whole argument. But there's been scientific studies that plants having like a mental activity where they can communicate with each other underneath the ground.
Andrew, even granting that there's something going on in plants that's like a mind, the plant is then using its physical form to do that, to do whatever it is it's doing that you're referring to, right? I mean, a plant is not a ghost. It's a physical thing. So we're back to the same question. Where are these examples of minds that exist without some kind of physical substrate?
The default position. It would absolutely be the default position because, let me think. Because when we're born, we actually have self-consciousness, whereas we have to learn how to relate to the physical world. That comes over time.
What does that have to do with anything?
I don't understand how... Yeah,
of course, some people know more stuff than others. We do learn things. What does that have to do with anything?
No, I mean, just the idea of consciousnness, it's not something that we learn. It's just there by the time when we're born.
Yeah, consciousness is something that is produced by the functioning of our brains. That's right. So what's your point?
Yeah, but there's no real physical evidence of that. I mean, how can you tell the difference between
Andrew, it's not that there is no physical evidence that the brain is making.
All of it is.
You just said there's no physical evidence that the brains are making the consciousness. But every time that we encounter clear evidence of consciousness, there's some physical processor that is producing it, or that there's some physical processor that appears to be producing it. I'll soften my position to that. Okay.
And no evidence of anything external or supernatural or spiritual.
Right.
Active or required.
And not only no evidence, there's no theory based on evidence of how that could even happen.
Okay.
So you got nothing.
Well, not necessarily.
Yes, necessarily. You have nothing.
Here's a few examples. Like, I just want to say, though, first of all, this was not my best example of a straw man argument, I admit.
We asked you for one. This is the one you gave
us. So hang on, Andrew. We didn't choose to steer you down this particular path to beat up on it. You came on and said that there's more of a, I forget the word you used. Fanatical attack on theistic positions, and a bunch of atheists that are using straw men. Now, I will fully acknowledge that out there on YouTube, it's a mixed bag. There are some people that are going to make brilliant arguments, and there are some people who are going to make terrible arguments. I hear terrible arguments from atheists, and I've called people out on them. I called Sam Harris out on this nonsense that the Bible says pi equals 3. Michael Shermer said something the other day on Twitter that at first blush looks kind of impressive, but when you actually look a little deeper, it was not really a good argument. The thing is, I don't think Shermer meant it that way. I think he was just kind of having a bit of fun. But if you're going to say that people are strawmanning your arguments, and I ask you for an example, you don't get to cry foul when we say no, in fact, they're not strawmanning you.
Well, let me just run through a quick list, and then I'll bring up some more strawman arguments. About minds existing without brains. There's heart transplant patients that, when their hearts are transplanted from one patient to another, they actually receive memories of the donor.
No, they don't.
Andrew, once again, Andrew, just a moment, Andrew. Even taking that rather ludicrous claim at face value, what just happened there? A physical part of one body got moved physically into another body. So that still doesn't go anywhere near supporting your claim that consciousnesses can be these like non-physical things that waft around or do not require a physical form to live in.
Not to mention,
but it wasn't a brain.
Well, not to.
Yeah, oh, come on! You're going to play that, and we already went over this with plants, right? You claimed plants had some kind of thing that was kind of like consciousness. Okay, fine. A plant is still a physical object. A heart is still a physical object. This thing you're calling God, where's God's, plant fibers or his heart or his brain or any of that stuff?
But even in addition to that, first of all, I don't believe for a second that this claim that somebody got a heart transplant and got memories along with it. I don't believe that. I think, matter of fact, I would suspect that somebody would be getting a Nobel Prize for demonstrating that this is actually true, and that it wouldn't probably appear in like glurge creationist nonsense. But let's say, for example, that we know nothing at all about consciousness or the mind. We don't understand it at all. Let's go back 1,000 years. What the hell does this have to do with the God? You actually have to supply evidence for your proposition, not try to poke holes in the actual scientific explanations that exist. Because if we don't know the answer to something, that doesn't mean that there's a God and a magical spirit that produces consciousness any more than it demonstrates that Thor threw lightning bolts before we knew what they were.
Well, there's the whole monad argument of Leibniz. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
I'm not even sure you listened to what I just said.
Well, no, I did. This is what you said. You said even if we go back throughout all of history and we check all the physical evidence related to scientists, there's no connection with that, with the God claim.
Yeah, that's not quite what I said, but go ahead.
But well, anyways, here's some more straw man arguments, I guess.
Okay.
It's basically like the most, like from the Bible. Like they take things from the Bible. And even though I'm just using, say, a New Testament claim on the Bible, they throw up things from the Old Testament.
Whoa! You're saying you made New Testament claims and somebody brought up Old Testament? Do you reject the Old Testament?
No. But some of the things, like where it comes to like doing animal sacrifices and things like that.
Yeah, but
there's no need to do that nowadays.
Okay, but are you rejecting the Old Testament?
No.
So how is it a straw man for somebody to bring up the Old Testament?
Because it's interpreted differently now since the New Testament.
Okay, and so was God wrong before?
No, and here's another thing. The Bible is a personal book, so Jesus taught.
So you can interpret it any old way you want and not be wrong then, if it's just a personal book.
If you can interpret it any way you want, why can't... Andrew, if you're free to interpret the Bible any way you want, how come these people who are disagreeing with you aren't allowed to do exactly that, and you're accusing them of raising up straw men against you?
Well, they can interpret it their way, but they're throwing that interpretation at me.
Oh, well.
I'm supposed to be.
And you're throwing your interpretation at them, Andrew.
But anyways, here's my question.
Well, no. You said you were going to offer straw man examples. And now you're complaining that people point to things in the Old Testament. Are you opposed to the Ten Commandments?
No, not at all. No.
Not at all. Okay. But what about the other 603?
Well, here's the thing about the Bible. The most central claim would be the Sermon on the Mount, because that's the Jesus' testimony before the public.
Well, why is that? Why is that the most important thing?
Because that's his biggest presentation before the public.
So what? Why is that the most important thing in the Bible? Do you realize that if it wasn't for the Genesis account and the fall, that there'd be no reason for a Jesus to even exist? Wouldn't that make that the most important thing in the Bible?
Well, I mean, you were just talking about morality, and this would be the
most
central.
I'm asking you questions because one of us definitely knows the Bible, and I'm going to see if the other one does.
Well, I'm a Christian who believes in Jesus as the Savior, but as far as being an expert on the Bible, I have to admit I'm not an expert.
So why do you believe in Jesus as a Savior?
Because I turn to it when I need, like, let's say. I just need like encouragement from God. I would look through the Bible.
Sure, and some people have a drink.
And that doesn't answer Matt's question. Matt asked you why you believe in the Bible, and you told him of a religious practice that you have.
Well,
that is not an answer to Matt's question. Why do you believe? Well, how exactly would you frame it?
Why did you believe in Jesus?
Yeah.
Well, in my own personal account, I was an atheist until like 3 years ago, and I was sick. And,
sure, I was an atheist for the first 4 or 5 years of my life, but go ahead.
You were sick?
I used to argue against religion.
Okay.
And
I bet you were no more effective at it than you are at arguing for religion
now. I never even asked my first question yet.
Okay.
But anyways. But then I was sick. I was in the hospital, and I was sent home. And I wasn't feeling well even when I was sent home. And a Christian friend of mine told me to open the Bible, and then to just randomly open to a page.
Mm-hmm.
I did that, and I ran. There was a psalm, walking through the valley of death, and that was the first thing I opened to.
Okay.
And I talked to my sister, and she said, I told her I wasn't feeling well. She said, just stay at home, because I've been through the emergency room a few times already. So I talked to my family. They said, stay home. But when I read that passage, it kind of like irked me. So I went back to the hospital, and as it turns out, if I didn't go back at that time, I would have died.
Okay, so you weren't feeling very well, and somebody had you open the Bible at random, and the Bible didn't say anything about go to the hospital because you're about to die. But it irked you, and you decided to take that action. And based on that, you are accepting that the Bible is true and Jesus is Lord.
Well, here's another thing. I was writing
hang on, that was a question. That was a question.
Yes, that's true, yes.
Okay, so when you say you were an atheist before, I have no problem accepting that. Were you ever a skeptic or a critical thinker? Because...
Oh, yeah. In fact, I just wrote a book about proving God was nothing. I want to prove God was nothing.
Yeah, see, the thing is this. What you've described doesn't demonstrate anything at all about the truth of a Bible or Jesus at all. I mean, there's nothing. It's like you have not. It's like you don't know anything about skepticism or critical thinking. What if somebody told you to open the Quran, and you to open the Quran to a passage that irked you enough to go back to the hospital?
Well, I admit, if that happened, I would be a Muslim.
Okay, and so why are you writing books about skepticism? Because you don't have the first clue about it.
Well, no, that's not true, because I was skeptical. How would you define skepticism?
Skepticism is twofold. There's philosophical skepticism and there's scientific skepticism. The philosophical skepticism is the idea that we should not believe things until there is sufficient evidence for them. And the application of that, which is the scientific skepticism, is to come up with a mechanism by which we can establish the truth of claims to the best of our ability. It involves the tools of science and critical thinking. It does not involve, hey, I got a feeling and I'm going to use the fallacy. I'm going to make a fallacious argument that of causation or truth by either circling the hits and avoiding the misses, or just it's your argument, or your argument about what you read in the Bible is so fallacious that it is beyond my capabilities to identify the exact fallacy in it right now. That's how bizarre it is.
Jesus taught in parables. Jesus is God, so the Bible teaches in parables. It seems to make sense.
Anyway, can we just lose this guy?
Yeah, I'm sorry. You said you hadn't got to your question. I'm going to let you ask your question, and then we're probably pretty much done, because Jesus spoke in parables. Jesus was God, therefore the Bible speaks in parables. Is another one of the. I ask your question.
Well, your show says it accepts only physical evidence from its callers. I think that's what you were relating to. What's physically demonstrable? But nowhere at the beginning of the show does it state that disclosure. So
what?
Nowhere at the beginning of the show do you state that you only want to hear physical evidence from your callers.
How many times have you called this show, Andrew? I recognize you from previous shows. You haven't figured that out by now?
Yeah, and first of all, it's not just physical evidence. I want actual good evidence. If you could demonstrate, see, here's the thing. We can only investigate scientifically those things that are in the natural world. There's this barrier that we can't go beyond. But if there's something beyond that barrier that manifests in reality, we can test for the phenomenon. That's what we do in every case when, for example, psychic mediums claim to be speaking to the dead. We can't actually investigate whether or not they're speaking from the dead. What we can do is investigate the veracity of their claims. Are they getting good information? Is there good reason to think that there's something beyond this? Likewise, when it comes to intercessory prayer, maybe there's a God who exists outside of space, but if people are saying that this God answers prayer in reality, that is necessarily a manifestation that we can test. And we do test it, and it comes out to be no more reliable than chance, and actually worse in situations where people are knowing they're being prayed for. There's a methodology to determine whether or not something is true. And if you believe something absent that methodology, you are necessarily being irrational and unskeptical because you are accepting things without good evidence.
Well, you're saying like theists are doomed to be delusional in the same sense that fundamentalists claim
no,
that
they're not
believers,
doomed,
non-believers
Andrew.
are doomed to hell.
Andrew, they're not doomed to be delusional at all.
I'm not sure those words or anything like those actually came out of my mouth. If I thought people were doomed to be delusional, I wouldn't be wasting my time trying to disabuse them of their delusions.
There certainly could be people out there who have sufficient evidence and have analyzed that evidence with sufficient careful thought and clarity that they have a valid reason to believe in some of the things you believe. You're not one of those people, but they could be out there.
Well, I think
even you're not doomed because you could stop.
Well, your position was if you don't have physical evidence, then how can you distinguish your belief from a delusion?
Okay, explain then. Fine, explain then. You have an answer to that question?
Sort of, but in debating, there's something known as the principle of charity, which is where you try to judge or promote the opposing view as the best possible interpretation. So if you take the principle of charity and apply it to a spiritual person, they're not going to have a physical argument. Like, they're not going to...
No, sorry.
It's a category mistake.
Sorry. No. We're not having formal debate, even if what you say is true, and I have no idea whether it is, but even if it is, this is not a formal debate, right? Here, we are asking for you to come up with, to present us with the reasons why you believe what you believe, and if we think those reasons make no sense, we're going to tell you. That's what we do on the show.
The principle of charity is such that you don't attempt to misrepresent your opponent's positions or hold them to standards beyond theirs. What I'm doing is saying that your standards are insufficient. You have demonstrated, if my position is, it's not there is no God, there is nothing supernatural, it is, if you are convinced that the supernatural exists, I want to know why so that I can determine whether or not you are rationally justified or not. And when you offer nothing more than I randomly opened a book and it said absolutely nothing about my situation, but it irked me enough to go back to the hospital, you are not demonstrating anything even the most charitable person on the planet would call a rational argument. And you're calling in to complain that people are strawmanning you when you couldn't argue your way out of a paper bag.
Well, it's like you're asking me to physically provide evidence of my most introspective thoughts.
Andrew, not once have I said, please provide physical evidence of your innermost thoughts. I've asked you what your reasons are for believing and talked about whether or not I find them acceptable. If you're going to keep misrepresenting what I actually said in order to keep your delusions safe from interference, then I will just hang up. So what was your question that you didn't get to ask?
Well, I was wondering how you encourage open debate without resorting to straw man arguments. But the point
Since you don't know a straw man from a paper bag, there's your answer.
I just flipped a coin, and on heads, we should hang up on him. And it came up heads, so now not only did you do the right thing and hang up on him, I also worship Abraham Lincoln.
Oh my gosh, that is so awesome. Penny for your thoughts, and a little less for some others.